Hello and welcome to this special discussion on the wire with Salil Shetty, who is Secretary General of Amnesty International. Now, Amnesty International is something you all have heard of. It's an organization which works on human rights at the global level. In 1976, it won a Nobel Prize for its special work on torture, on justice, bringing justice to people who are tortured and whose rights are violated around the world. Amnesty has a membership of 7 million. These are, well, members and activists, and it's an organization which is actually in some ways run by these members. The board is elected by these members. Of course, it's controversial in other ways because the various countries that they work in, many of those the states do not particularly like Amnesty's work because it exposes the states in regard to violation of rights. So, we will discuss all of that. Welcome to our show, Salil Shetty. So, please tell us what's going on around the world. You were sitting at a vantage point, and we see authoritarian regimes, mostly right-wing, coming to power around the world, even in societies which have ostensibly had good record on human rights in the past, also becoming a bit, kind of regressing. So recently, Turkey, your director, one of your directors, got arrested. Well, you don't expect a lot from Turkey. So how do you see the overall scenario? Then we'll come to India later. Sure.
No, so Amnesty, thank you for having me here. Amnesty International publishes an annual report, which is kind of the state of the world of human rights report. And in 2016, we said that human rights have been in free fall in recent years. And you can divide it broadly into two parts. One is where countries where
it was a bad year, particularly bad year.
It's an awful year. So, I mean, of course, it goes up and down, but the last few years have been very bad. So, firstly, in terms of countries which are in conflict, so you look at Syria, you look at Yemen, etc., and those kind of countries are in human rights free zones because the government really doesn't function or is beyond any kind of accountability. And we shouldn't think of conflicts only as countries in conflict. There are also zones within countries which are in conflict, like Kashmir in India is an example of that. So
permanent conflict zones, as it were.
And those are places where human rights, are very rarely respected. But even within that, I think what we've seen in recent years is that, even 2-3 years ago, if there are some rules of war, there's international humanitarian law, there's a Geneva Convention. You're supposed to observe these, but in recent past, all of those are being like, schools are bombed, hospitals are bombed, children are dying, even funeral processions are bombed, and nobody seems to care anymore. And then there are these countries which are supposedly, more in steady state, and because historically when you say human rights abuses, you think of Iran or China or Saudi Arabia, closed countries. But now the new phenomenon, as you said, is you have, because Amnesty is used to fighting against dictatorships and illegitimate regimes, but now we have elected dictatorships. And that's, Erdogan is of course a very good.
So how do you divide your time and energies?
No,
even democracy is ostensibly, turning rogue.
No, it's a real challenge, I think. I mean, for an organization which has limited resources, we have to constantly juggle this. But, the phenomenon that you're referring to is more in the last few years. We have seen this where you have the leaders coming to power, elected to power. And we are calling it the politics of demonization, because essentially what you do is you take one group and you demonize it. You create an us and them effect. You scapegoat one group. Now that group might be foreigners, refugees, Muslims, women, LGBT, whatever the group is. And you whip up a sentiment and you promise the earth to the population. You come to power on the basis of scapegoating, and you create a hyper-national, so this kind of nationalistic fervor is very much a part of this package.
So do you, in the last say 10 years, 15 years or so, one has also witnessed this this peculiar phenomenon where there is economic globalization, which is, one could argue, bringing efficiencies in the global economy. And there is political nationalization. So now economic globalization is driven by primarily, besides movement of capital, trade, by movement of people. So migrant workers are creating new efficiencies, especially moving from east to west, now happening even within the east. Now, is this a rights of migrants? Is this a huge focus area, because everywhere we see a new kind of politics emerging where minorities or migrants are under attack. Migrants are also minorities in many countries, and the worst manifestation of that is what we saw in the last year and a half, where migrants from Syria, etc., are moving towards the west. Germany took 1 million people trying to rehabilitate them. So how does this affect your work?
So, I mean, we, technically one has to differentiate between migrants and refugees. And it's an important distinction because, I talked about serious conflicts.
Refugees are political refugees, actually, right? And migrants are economic, could be economic
so,
migrants.
We talked about conflicts. The interesting thing about conflicts is that the number of conflicts between countries has actually come down. What we are facing increasingly is intrastate conflicts, conflicts within countries. So if you take Syria, Syria is not fighting a war with somebody else, they're fighting a war internally. Same with Iraq or Afghanistan, all the big cases, or Sudan, South Sudan.
Absolutely.
So those people, those are the ones, but the net effect of these conflicts is that more than 60 million people are uprooted from their households as we speak. 22 million of them plus are refugees. Now, refugees means that they're actually pushed out of their own borders as a consequence of conflict. So these are people who are fleeing from war and persecution. And the Refugee Convention and the international laws around this have been specially created because these people are already facing severe persecution. So the world is meant to treat them with this in a special way. Unfortunately, when these people end up coming to Europe or Australia, they are treated doubly, so this is doubly persecuted. In the first half of this year, the number of people who have drowned in the Mediterranean exceeds what's happened in previous years, so the kind of pushback. Australia are the pioneers in pushing people into the water, by the way. The Europeans have followed the same model, and it's a shocking, so on the one hand the numbers are shocking, 22 million. On the other hand, as a proportion of the world's population, it's less than 1%. So if there was global responsibility sharing, it would be fine. I've spent a lot of time in the last 2-3 years in camps in Syria, meeting the refugees. I can tell you, not one refugee, woman, man, child, say they want to go to Europe or the United States. They all want to go back home to Syria, but they can't. So, but we have been very, very responsible in how we are dealing with this.
So tell me, you said 2016, as per Amnesty's report, was probably the worst year in recent memory, right? So why is it the worst year, number one? And number two, given the changing nature of global politics, economics, is Amnesty also changing the way it should work, or or changing strategies, or its approach to the rights issues around the country? Then we'll talk about India now.
Sure. Around the world.
Give me a broad perspective on.
No. So why is it the worst year? I already gave you one reason. Since the Second World War, we've never seen so many refugees in the history, in recent history.
That we just discussed,
So that's the whole conflict, that situation. But even in countries which are supposedly, more in a steady state, we have, over 100 countries last year were involved in torturing people. We had over 60 countries which have, harassed and intimidated human rights defenders. The whole issue of crushing civil society and dissent is a big part of the story. And these leaders we talked about, these elected muscular leaders, they're emerging like Orban in Hungary. So the whole idea is that he shows his muscle, his strength, and silences everybody else. And they've got a playbook. So number one, they want to crush the media, silence the media, intimidate the media. The second is civil society, and thirdly, emaciate judiciary. So the kind of primary pillars of society are eroded.
So it's interesting you mentioned that you're now dealing with democratically elected authoritarians. It's happening in the West, it's happening in the US. It's happening in India to a large extent, because we also currently have a regime which civil society at least feels that it is impinging on the rights of people to eat they want to eat, what they want to eat. There's a subtle campaign, some would say not so subtle, in terms of what you see in change of laws in regard to cattle trade, which many feel is actually targeting minorities, and even other groups like Dalits who depend on cattle trade and cattle and the leather industry, various derivatives that you get from cattle for industry purposes. So how do you see this situation? I mean, how do you see the way things are happening in India? It's something that the global press is talking about, Indian press also is talking about. So
no, I think there's this kind of what we talked about on the global stage is also reflected in many ways in India, and the big challenge is that most of these leaders have quite significant support from the population. So as I said, it's very different from the past where these leaders didn't have popular support, whereas in most of these cases, like Philippines, for example,
this is something different. This is something new,
fundamentally different. So Philippines, like he's now running this so-called war on drugs, which we call war on poor people, because drugs are managed. Actually, the whole trade is run by a few rich people. He's killed 3,000-4,000 mostly poor people in the last few months. So the situation in India is, the Indian situation is slightly different because the leadership here doesn't go around talking in the way that Erdogan or Orban or Duterte, because those guys are very clear, we are a illiberal democracy, we should put an end to all of this nonsense, this is the way we're going to run the country. Here you don't have leaders saying that. Now in practice...
Although here we have various satellite groups of the ruling formation, which with whom the Prime Minister or the ruling party may have a relationship of deniability, it's however thinly disguised, but they create problems. They create this whole whole environment where the minorities and the the deprived sections feel they feel threatened, to say the least.
I mean, Amnesty has gone public on the whole issue of the cow.
In fact, in Bangalore, I think Amnesty itself was a target of an attack where you were holding a conference on the Kashmir issue.
Question, which, by the way, in the last week they're in the process of withdrawing the case, and because it was a fabricated case to start with. But it's taken almost a year for them to come to that conclusion.
They're withdrawing the case?
Yeah, because this is kind of what's called a B report.
You feel vindicated about that?
I mean, we were sure that we had not done anything wrong. It was fully fabricated, but it has to go through the process. It's taken 1 year of all our energy, and so this is another thing, right? So you kind of take the energy from people.
Process is the punishment.
Yeah, so no, but yeah, you're right. I mean, so on the cow vigilantism stuff that we are noticing now, I mean, since April of this year, we've had 10 public killings or lynchings of Muslims mainly. And the silence around it from the top leadership is quite deafening for sure. So it's one thing when you don't say, nasty things, but on the other hand, you should stop others. You need to be clear and have a clear position. So
there are other rights issues involved here. Now, forget about the cow. Sorry, for the moment, because you have laws in almost many states which prohibit cow slaughter. We are not talking about the cow at all. We are now talking about other categories of cattle. Buffalo. Now, buffalo through some other legal changes. Today, buffalo trade is also not possible. People are being attacked who carry buffalo from one point to another. Buffalo is a huge industry. India is, the beef export, I'm saying buffalo meat export and leather industry is about $12 billion. And vast populations are dependent on this for employment, especially Dalits, some of the backward sections. So, wouldn't this form part of their human rights? I mean, gently, commonsensically speaking.
No, I mean, livelihood is a basic right. But I mean, we've been quite vocal on all of these issues. I mean, one thing which we are very conscious of, whether it's a Kashmir issue or, the attack on Muslims or, minority groups, we've had the attacks in 1984 on the Sikh population. So, unfortunately, this cuts across party lines. Yeah. So, nobody is particularly pure on this issue. But so
we're talking about the state and the and citizens here. Not particularly targeting a ruling party or the...
No, for sure. So there's no question, we've been absolutely clear, and we're very deeply concerned also with the situation in Kashmir. So on AFSPA, for example, the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which enables human rights violations to take place in Kashmir. We've been very, very clear.
You see the Kashmir rights situation having worsened,
I think in the,
much more than...
so if you take a long view of the issue, it always goes up and down.
Yeah, if you take a, say, 25-year view.
It's different, but the last 6 months, things have, over 90 people who've been protesting have lost their lives. We've, and the Public Safety Act, has even been used on juveniles, which it is absolutely not supposed to do. And the issue around the AFSPA is that it gives complete impunity to security forces, and the Jammu and Kashmir state are supposed to get permissions before they prosecute any security forces. And every time they request the central government for permission, they have not even got one case where they have been given permission. So it creates it is true that you have like the pilgrims, Amarnath pilgrims, it's totally unacceptable what happened. It is true that security forces also attacked. But there is a rule of law, there is a way in which there are international standards, and the use of pellets, parading that guy in front of the, Farooq Dar in front of the, those are things which are completely unacceptable.
Do you face any difficulties in gathering information research in the current environment? What I mean is under this regime last 3 years?
Yeah, I think, again, it's not only in this regime. We face difficulties.
But do degrees vary, or is it the same?
I think it goes up and down.
It goes up and down,
So, unfortunately, on that front, you take the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. It was created in 1976 in the middle of the emergency by Indira Gandhi. This government is highly critical, rightly so, of the use of the emergency and, all the draconian powers that the Congress used at that time. And now they're, making complete
half
use.
Of this government was in jail at that time.
And Amnesty fought for them.
I think today they're suffering from amnesia.
That's common, by the way. Erdogan in Turkey was the mayor of Istanbul 18 years ago. And he read out a poem for which he was arrested. Amnesty made him an amnesty prisoner of conscience. We fought for his case.
Oh, you fought for his case.
Similarly, a lot of the leaders...
Do you regret that?
No, it seems like he seems to be regretting it. But so it's equally true with the leaders of the current government. When they were in jail, Amnesty fought their cases for them. So yeah, memory is short with people in power often.
So tell me, now coming to some other issues, how do you... conceptually, you said that Amnesty is broadening the kind of issues that you take up, right? Now, political rights is your prime concern, but then now people also talk about socio-economic rights. In India, whether people below poverty line, whether they are getting their due, whatever the welfare measures are meant for them, are they being delivered? We have new instrumentalities to deliver, like Aadhaar, whether Aadhaar is working or not. Along with Aadhaar, you have technology, you have surveillance of various kinds. Now it cuts both ways. You're talking about technology. Now, how do you see some of these new things which are now part of our daily lives? How does Amnesty view these?
No, so
because there's a rights angle there, right?
So first, on the conceptual level, because the mothership is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And the Universal Declaration is very clear that you cannot separate civil political rights, which is freedom of expression, association, movement, right to life. You cannot separate that from health.
It's part of our constitution also, right to life.
The constitution is very much reflecting the Universal Declaration, written by Ambedkar, who understood as a Dalit what the issues were. So the two sets of rights are not just indivisible, they're interdependent. So we cannot separate the two. So particularly in a poor country, in a developing country, these two, I always say that those who are poor have no voice, and those who have no voice are poor. So you cannot separate the voice from, so in the UN construct as well, we say there's freedom from hunger and freedom from fear, and the two have to go together. Now, practically, of course, managerially, Amnesty, we have to see what we can prioritize and what we can't. Technology is a good example of this, where we have been dragged into that space, because today the debate on freedom of expression is largely online, because like Raif Badawi, who's a blogger in Saudi Arabia, is arrested, because he writes a blog, so somebody tweets
and
they
states are unable to cope with the internet space, right?
Well, the states states keep claiming that they can't cope and they're not capable, but when it comes to doing wrong things, they acquire capability very quickly. Yeah. So we are in the thick of the surveillance and encryption discussion. So we have really pushed a lot of the big companies. In fact, the only major company which is not fully using encryption now is Microsoft in relation to Skype. And we are pushing them hard on that question. But my view is that while technology is creating a huge amount of challenges, like artificial intelligence now, for example, it could dramatically change how things look in the next 2 or 3 decades, and nobody is looking at the ethical frameworks around it and how it could be abused, because artificial intelligence is kind of machine learning. It can easily multiply the existing biases. So if you're using predictive policing, they're starting to use it in the US already. So it already starts biased against men.
We don't even have laws on privacy in regard to technology, etc. So one big debate in India is, I don't know how Amnesty looks at it, this whole Aadhaar issue. Now, fundamentally, the Supreme Court has said that it should be voluntary. Now, there are 800 million poor who want to be recognized by the state for delivery of welfare programs. So, they are taking Aadhaar numbers, right? But there are a lot of people who do not want Aadhaar, but they have no option because it's being linked to your tax, PAN card, tax payments, etc. So one argument that has come from certain quarters is that you are already under surveillance through your emails, through your Facebook. There is this super state in terms of servers sitting in the US which are tracking every movement of yours, every breath of yours. So why complain about an extra kind of Aadhaar number which might so how do you see this argument?
No, I think there's 2 dimensions to that. Number one is when there's a very big difference when you use Facebook and that's ending up your privacy being eroded, because you're making an active choice, and hopefully it's an informed choice. But if somebody poor and they don't really know what the choices are and they're being forced into it, then that's not acceptable. Secondly, in governments like ours and developing country governments where the state is A, not very transparent in the way it operates, and B, it's potentially very capable of misusing these powers. That's problematic. Even in the US, for example, when it came to the use of drones, Amnesty really challenged it, because the process of using drones, we've studied the situation in North Waziristan where an old grandmother, a little girl is killed by somebody literally playing video games somewhere. We don't even know where that person is sitting. So what is the transparency? What is the chain of command? So technology is, I think, brilliant, but not without accountability and transparency.
So how do you see accountability evolving in context of technology? Is technology giving states like unregulated power, and is accountability commensurately catching up with that in terms of privacy laws?
We always look at technology as a bunch of opportunities and a bunch of threats.
Yeah, it cuts both ways.
And so, the opportunity is the wire, for example. You are able to, it's democratizing opinion, views. It's amazingly powerful to mobilize people and to challenge the state and hold them accountable. So all the plus side. But on the downside, it's really a big challenge, and we now have, governments like Ethiopia or Egypt, who are using technology to just crush human rights defenders. Our own director in Turkey, who you mentioned at the outset, she was arrested because she was in a workshop which had something to do with digital security, and so this is becoming a very serious challenge, and there are not enough, protections and safeguards in that space.
Are you finding it easier to work? Or your members, are they finding it easier to work around in different countries as compared to, say, 10, 15 years ago?
No, it's becoming
what are the kind of challenges?
We've had, you talked about our own office in Bangalore where, we had hundreds of people standing outside and chanting, and you don't really know who these people are. We had a similar situation in Nigeria recently where there was a big procession of 100, 200 people, because in the case of Nigeria, Amnesty challenged the military who were abusing the rights of people in the northeast in the name of protecting them from Boko Haram. There was a massive, abuse of power, disproportionate use of force. So this procession was all on YouTube. So they came there and they started raising, said 1 week you have to close the office, we'll burn it down. By the end of the procession, there was a big fight between the protesters because they were distributing money. They were all paid guys, you know. So, so this is kind of, and yeah, we've had Turkey as a challenge. We've had 2 of our staff, contractors actually in Burkina Faso were shot down. Okay. So we are facing a lot of challenges, but I mean, that's what Amnesty is there for, you know, to speak truth to power, and we take, you know, we take the risks.
If you were to create a, I'm sure, I don't know whether you're doing it already, pecking order of countries in terms of the violation of human rights, where do you think would India figure?
Well, we don't do that kind of, you know, fashion show, you know, the rank order thing.
No, it's in today's context, it might be useful, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult because, you know,
it might sort of motivate countries to at least go.
No, I think, you know,
go down the peg, not be among the top, say, 5 violators.
No, I think the challenge with India is, you know, that we have a amazingly powerful constitution. We now have created in the last 70 years strong policies, institutions, and we do have a, you know, vibrant civil society and all of that. The implementation is mostly pathetic, you know. So, I mean, you have what, like some 20 million plus cases of backlog in the judiciary.
It's 3 crore, 30 million.
Yeah, so and 10% of them have been there for more than a decade, you know. Yeah. So you have the whole under trial situation in India. You know, 70% or so of the cases of people in prisons are people who should have, you know,
this should be one of the worst in the world.
On these dimensions, for sure, you know, and then on the, you know, health, education, water, we have a big backlog. So that's now cumulative. It's been going on for a long time. And then we now, and this is what I'm saying, you know, why doesn't this government focus its energy on dealing with these questions? You know, we have like over 300,000 cases or so of, you know, violence against women reported, 34,000 rapes, over 40,000 attacks on Dalits, Adivasis, just reported in the last year or two. So it's not like the government doesn't have enough to do. Why do you then want to have a beef ban, you know, create new problems, you know? I mean, it's just a waste of energy.
So finally, do you, Salil, a very specific question on minorities in India. Do you, in your assessment or in Amnesty's assessment, you've been researching India for so many years, do you think minorities are feeling more insecure and more unsafe in the last 3 years than any time before? On a broader basis?
No, I mean,
I'm not talking about one state or the other.
It's very difficult to compare at different points things have happened, but in the last 6 months, with these public lynchings and killings which have happened, particularly of Muslims, I think there's no question that the minorities are feeling insecure, unsettled and anxious, and this is the last thing we need.
Okay. And another issue which I feel very strongly about, can India claim to be a modern economy or stroke society with so many people dying because they enter sewers, manual scavenging? You know, there's a large number of workers who are physically they enter without any gear, proper resources. And Bezwada Wilson recently gave a figure that more than 1,300 or 400, some data he gave, have died in the last 3-4 years. How do you feel about that? Is that an issue that that should be sort of upfronted, you know?
It's not a new issue. Manual scavenging has been discussed for a long time. Unfortunately, most of them are Dalits, you know, so they are not people who have a strong voice in the constituency fighting for them, so it's not been addressed. It's definitely a major issue. The same with the tribals.
Actually, deaths.
So
but deaths are getting.
But there are deaths of manual scavengers who are mostly Dalits, and similarly, you know, who's keeping count of the number of tribals who are dying in the coal belt, in place, you know, we have in
You've
the
done
last,
a lot of work in the coal mines,
in the last month, I think we have referred 88 cases or so. Not one of those FIRs have been taken up, you know, so there are many, and that's what I'm saying. So, but you have the Universal Periodic Review, which happens at the Human Rights Council. For India, recently went through it. So you have the government of India coming there and saying, you know, we have a vibrant civil society, we are so proud of it. You know, and at least 5 governments said in that very context that you have a Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. Why are you using that to discriminate against some NGOs selectively? Now, I'm the first person to say that NGOs should raise money locally, become more accountable.
Transparent,
All of that is absolutely right. but to selectively, last year 25 NGOs are doing human rights advocacy have been, this has been used to attack and intimidate them. So we are full of contradictions in that sense.
Although two non-profit organizations, by changing law, kind of exonerated themselves, Congress and BJP. And finally, I forgot to ask this question, it was there. What do you feel about the issue of Rohingyas?
No, I mean, this is a particularly sensitive subject for us because, Amnesty campaigned for the release of Aung San Suu Kyi, who was under house arrest for almost 2 decades. So, the issue of the Rohingyas, is very disappointing that she hasn't really stood up adequately and spoken up loudly enough. But so yeah, I mean the Rohingyas
state captures even good people, right?
Yeah, I mean the power captures or corrupts, as they say.
When I say state, yeah, states represented for power.
No, I think the situation is not
state
just
is inherently predatory, so.
No, so you have the, it's a Buddhist majority country, and Buddhists are, traditionally known as the most peaceful, harmony loving people, and now you have attacks on these stateless people. They've been pushed out of Bangladesh and they've got nowhere to go. And unlike in the case of Europe, where because of proximity to Europe, the refugee crisis there gets a lot of visibility, the Rohingya crisis is getting no visibility. Thousands are losing their lives on the Andaman. We find mass graves in Malaysia and Thailand unaccounted for. And even in India, we have a slight worry that there's about 14,000 or so Rohingya inside India. Yeah. And it's very important that their rights are protected. We've historically done that. So it's good that you've raised this issue. It's a very important question. And right now, they have very few people who are raising the voice on their behalf.
Finally, administratively, do you find it easy to work in India in terms of you have to raise finances, do your operations are now, I'm told, totally decentralized. Unlike earlier where Amnesty from London would send money and send people from there, now it's all kind of done at the local level.
I mean, we've had lots of challenges in India over the years. We've had amnesties open and close. I mean, Amnesty's history in India goes back to Jayaprakash Narayan's time and George Fernandes. So many people have been involved over decades. What we've done with the current government, as we've done with the Congress government in the last 5 years since we've opened Amnesty India, is to be totally transparent with them on the way we work. They are not really willing to give us a foreign contribution permission. So, so we've had to structure the organization in a way that works in this context, and we've been totally open with them. So, yeah.
And you've done it successfully.
We're trying. I mean, Amnesty, by the way, takes no money from governments or companies. Our primary
basically from members, huh?
From individuals. The majority of our money comes from individuals. We have small contributions from some companies, very few governments, but overwhelming majority is from individuals. So we are reliant on.
Anyway, it's crowdsourced.
Crowdsourced or passion sourced or conviction sourced. So
thank you, Salil Shetty, for talking to us.
Thank you.
Thanks.